Welcome everyone to our Board of Education study session. It is February 18th, 2025. It is 5 p.m. We're going to begin by indicating who's here. We're going to start with Julie because she is online.
Connie Burgess.
Kim Chandler. Chris Wynn.
Karen Winder.
Clark Nelson.
Ben Horsted.
Nicole McDermott and Todd Harbor will be here any minute, I'm sure. All right. First item, as far as I know, we don't have any patron participation signups. Is that correct, Luke? Okay. We have some consent items. We've had these for a few days to be able to ask any questions. If there's no questions, I will entertain a motion.
I move we accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Julie, did you say it? Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. We are going to move on to our action item. We have administrative appointments. And if there are no questions here, I will also entertain a motion for this.
I move we accept the administrative appointments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the.
Can I make a comment before you call for a vote?
Yeah.
Thanks. So, this list that I was sent yesterday, I got to it, and I'm kind of another situation where 2 weeks ago we lost Tyler Howe, and I was really sad. And then I looked at the list and about lost my heart, because I'm looking at two of my favorite principals over here who are going to be appointed in just a minute. And I realized, I did the math, that that's 23% of my precinct. I'm losing my principals. And so for my Gorley people and my Farnsworth people, just know I'm still fighting for you. And while I wish these principals well, and I'm so excited to have you in your new upcoming positions where you can really embrace our new vision, our new direction, take all of that back to our schools and help not only one school, but a lot of schools. And like I said, truly, truly get behind the new direction we're trying to take our district, and get behind Ben as superintendent, and get behind the board. So I'm really excited. I know I'm sad, but I'm really excited to see you guys in your new positions and holding our principals accountable, and also helping them catch the vision that we're trying to get others to catch. So I just want to send my love, and Farnsworth and Gorley, and my Lancers, same thing. So I'm not forgetting about you, even with this little bit of turnover in the admin. Farnsworth had, this will be 4 principals in 7 years. That's tough on any community. So, but we're fighting for you, and we'll do our best to take care of you.
Thanks, Karen. All right. Any further discussion? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion carries. I'm going to turn the time over to Ben.
All right, before I turn the time over to Dr. Howe to make introductions, I just want to echo Karen's sentiments, and I appreciate she said that so kindly and nicely. It's a little bit different than the emojis I was getting over the weekend, but I can appreciate her consternation and concern. That's a big gap out of some of our most needy communities, and these are stellar individuals. And I gave a charge to Dr. Howe and the folks on his hiring committee to find the best instructional leaders in the district to help us set our focus on instructional improvement and improving student outcomes. And we had a stellar group of individuals apply for these positions. I could not have been more pleased to see the best and the brightest. And so truly, it came down to fit in some regards, and we're very grateful for these appointments tonight. And I'm gonna turn the time now over to Dr. Howe to introduce these phenomenal individuals.
Thank you, Superintendent, and good evening to the board and to our executive leadership team.
I'm new to this, but I want to echo what I just heard our superintendent say. I've been very privileged over many years to do lots and lots and lots of interviewing. And I do not feel I've ever been in the kind of experience I was this last week of the caliber of administrators that we have in our school district, and their dedication and their work was one of the hardest processes that I've ever been a part of. And I celebrate each of those individuals who are part of the process, and I'm excited to get to celebrate those who are newly appointed and get to do some introductions, but it was a privilege and a burden to be a part of, and I'm excited to get to be here for that. I'm going to say some names and have these individuals stand up, and then we'll get a chance to get to know not just them a little bit more, but their family members, if we could. Our first person we want to recognize is Wes Cutler. Wes, if you could stand up for us. Wes is being appointed as Secondary School Leadership and Improvement Director. Just to give you a little background on Wes, Wes has been a social studies teacher at Evergreen Junior High School. He was an assistant principal at Granger Elementary and Olympus High School, and is currently the principal at Evergreen, no, that's incorrect, at Eisenhower Junior High School. Caught a typo here. Wes will be a Secondary School Leadership and Improvement Director, as stated previously. Wes, can you do introductions?
This is my wife, Tricia.
Next, we want to recognize Amber Clayton. Amber, if you could stand up. Round of applause for Amber. Amber is being appointed a Elementary School Leadership and Improvement Director. She has been assistant principal in Salt Lake and Davis School District. She's been principal at Granger Elementary, Mill Creek Elementary, and Woodstock Elementary. She's currently an associate director of K-12 Literacy and Curriculum and Instruction. Congratulations, Amber. Can you introduce anybody who came with you? Or?
My husband had a medical procedure this afternoon, so I have my CNI family with me.
Wonderful. We're going to make her present later, and that's what happens when you don't bring other people with you. Next, we want to recognize Wendy Lovell. Wendy, if you could stand up. Wendy is also being appointed as Elementary School Leadership and Improvement Director. Wendy has been a third grade teacher at Crestview Elementary. She was an intern assistant principal at Benyon Junior High, Academy Park Elementary, and Farnsworth Elementary. She was principal at Western Hills Elementary and is currently the principal at Farnsworth Elementary School. Wendy, can you do introductions?
My mother-in-law, Brenda, my husband, Jason, my father, Chip, my son-in-law, Caleb, my daughter, Becca, and my son, Eric.
Someone with red hair we identified there. Congratulations. And finally, we want to recognize Briar Matucci. Briar also being recognized as a Elementary School Leadership and Improvement Director. Briar is taught at West Kearns, Taylorsville, Elk Run, and Armstrong Academy. Briar was a Title I instructional coach at Jackling Elementary. She was an administrative intern at Diamond Ridge, Gorley Elementary Schools. So congratulations to Briar. She's being appointed to be an Elementary Leadership and Improvement Director. Can you introduce your family today, Briar?
My daughter-in-law, Avery, my son, David, my mom, Joan, my other daughter-in-law, Charlie, and my son, Matt.
Thank you. A round of applause for you. It would be great. A big thank you from me to this group. I'm excited to get to talk to you a lot more. We get to start a journey together, but I'm excited about this. I'm excited about all you've accomplished in the past and your desire to keep building Granite School District in every way you possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Howe, and please say hello to your families while you can, because you're not going to see them very much anymore. We're going to be working really hard. Just kidding. We're so glad and excited to have you be part of our instructional leadership team. You're amazing, and we so appreciate the support of your families here tonight.
We're thrilled to have you guys on board. We're sad to see those leave who are leaving, but we are so excited for these new ones, so thank you. You're welcome to stay. It's a thrilling meeting where you can go. we're going to go ahead and move on. We have an information item. Excuse me. Dr. Converse is going to come up and we're going to have her present on curriculum adoption. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Board President McDermott and Vice President Nguyen, board members. As you're becoming more aware, we have this new instructional adoption process that requires a couple interactions with the curriculum that you are looking at as recommended for adoption. So this is the first of those two. So I'll just quickly go over the slides that you've all seen before, and you can ask any questions you might have. So the objective for these is to provide a summary of the acquisition of the curricular instructional materials, and then to introduce the first reading of the request for proposal after our instructional materials adoption committee has already gone through the RFP and are making the formal adoption recommendation. So there's three pieces of legislation and policy that apply here. One is the Senate Bill 55, which actually transformed what we used to do with a single adoption to a two-meeting adoption, and then with the public review in the middle. And then that's based on our Utah code, and then we have built our Granite Board policy to support that existing legislation. Just for a quick review of definitions, in the legislation, the existing code, learning materials are any resource used to deliver or support a student's learning. Instructional materials are materials that a local board adopts and approves for use with the LEA. And then there are supplemental materials, and those are materials that are adopted at the school level or at the individual teacher level, and they are not approved or adopted by the board formally, but they abide by all legislation and code that exists, and they adhere to our curriculum topics guide. So we have two kinds of instructional material: core instructional materials, which are large-scale adoptions, like the one we're talking about tonight, which is the secondary ELA adoption, and that accompanies a RFP, or a request for proposal, and applies to all of our accounting and purchasing rules as well, and policies. And then there are also ancillary instructional materials. Those are materials like assessments or other ancillary tools that we might also centrally adopt. So just to know the difference between those two pieces. But they also go through an RFP process. So according to SB 55, the local board must make instructional materials that the school district uses readily accessible and available for parent review. Right now, we have all of these materials up on the website. It went out through Blackboard. We have also have them posted on social media, and you received a copy of those materials. So they're all able for view, and we're collecting those parent comments as we speak. Those will be available for the next board meeting that we review the materials. And then the other part of this is to establish an open process involving educators, parents of students enrolled in the LEA to review and recommend the instructional materials for the board. And that's what our instructional materials adoption committee has been involved in recommending. So as the last slide said, this is a little repetitive, but we post the recommended learning materials online to allow for review, and then before adopting the recommended instructional materials to public meetings. So this will be the first. Our second is hoped to be the March 4th date. And this is to allow for adequate time for the public to review the materials, to ask questions, to have questions answered, and to provide any opinions they might have about the materials before formal adoption. And then finally, the board formally adopts or approves the instructional materials in an open board meeting. And you've already received the links to these materials, but they're still actively available to all of our patrons and And those individuals who want to come in can also schedule an appointment to come in and review the materials. Questions?
Just some clarification items, because I think I heard two different things. This is the first meeting, March board meeting, with the second and final meeting.
Right.
Okay, I thought I heard there would be a first reading and then a second reading, so just confirming. And then there's another sex ed curriculum as well that's being reviewed by the public right now. Is that just going to be approved?
So the sex ed materials are out for public review. It's a bit of a different process. We still have to follow the 2 board meeting rule, but we have a different policy that preceded this legislation that actually requires them to be out for 30 days in public review. So they're out for public review. We'll introduce those materials in the next board meeting, and then those would not be formally recommended for approval until the April meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next up, we're going to invite Ms. Amber Clayton up. We get to learn about the science of reading and literacy.
I apologize. I've got a spinning wheel of death.
Is this the one that's later on in the presentation?
It is.
Okay. It'll probably just take a second.
Here we go.
There we go.
Don't look at my password. Here we go. Okay. This one right here.
Okay, so here they are on the tabs.
Okay.
Let me just get you the presentation. All right, I'll just
Use it
use
down
that
here.
to.
Well, I am finally ready and so excited to be with you today. We get to talk a little bit about the science of reading and how it is impacting our state and our district and what's happening in our classrooms here in Granite. So it's exciting to be here with you. That one?
That works. 2 fingers, you can scroll through.
Okay, so 2 fingers. There we go. So we're going to talk about 3 things this afternoon. We're going to talk about just a quick overview of science of reading, and then we're going to talk about the implications of SB 127 on literacy instruction in Utah, and then we'll talk about current trends that are happening in the school district. So here we go. So the science of reading is, it's a frustrating term to me because I think we see it capitalized in the literature as science of reading, as if it's a defined, like it's concrete, that it's going to last forever, that this is the end all and be all. But really what it is, it should be science of reading lowercase in that It is what we know about best practice at this current time based on the research. And so it is going to evolve all the time. So you're going to see lots of capitalization, but I want you to think wider than that. It's about using the very best that we know from science and applying it to the way we help students learn how to read. So according to the Reading League, the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. We're going to watch a really short video. Now, I challenge to Utah, we need our own video. This one's from West Virginia, but in 3 minutes, it really very quickly summarizes some of the key components.
When we say science of reading. The science of reading is not a program, and it's not a couple of research studies that say this or that. It's the body of scientific research over the last several decades that definitively proves how the brain learns to become a proficient reader and writer. So when we say something is aligned with the science of reading, we mean that it's aligned with that body of research. Well, what does the research say? It says some things you probably already know. There are 5 pillars of reading: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. But the science also points to some things that are not common knowledge yet. First, written language is a contrived system. The brain images show that reading and writing don't come naturally, which is why high-quality instruction is so important. Secondly, phonics needs to be taught explicitly and systematically, with a scope and sequence, but without using pre-cueing. Pre-cueing is an unusual term for something that you've probably seen everywhere. You may have heard of it in strategies like, does it look right, does it sound right, does it make sense, guess and check, MSD, or reading recovery. Pre-cueing encourages readers to use clues other than phonic patterns to decode words. The problem is that's not how proficient readers read. We use a process called orthographic mapping that allows our brains to decode a word by horse faster than we can recognize a picture of a horse. The brain is hardwired for sight and speech, but the connections in our brains that make orthographic mapping possible don't get built if we're using pictures or other clues to guess words instead of using phonics patterns to decode them. Next, high-frequency words need to be taught using sound spelling patterns as much as possible, rather than asking students to memorize sight words. Memorizing words stores them in a different part of the brain than orthographic mapping, which means that students are spending a lot more energy recalling the words and aren't able to connect their sound spelling patterns to other similar words. Another thing that's not common knowledge is how comprehension works. It is settled science that the single biggest driver of reading comprehension is background knowledge of words and the world. So we must intentionally build knowledge and vocabulary about a variety of social studies and science topics from the moment students enter school. We can't wait, as the old saying goes, until students are able to read to learn. The best way to build that knowledge is to use rich grade-level text for comprehension instruction, and to use scaffolding to give all students access to those texts. That requires a shift away from the common practices to the easier level text for struggling students, because research shows that students build knowledge and fluency much faster when everyone reads and writes about the same rich grade-level text during comprehension and content instruction. In a K-2 classroom, this is accomplished through read-alouds and discussions of texts that are a grade or 2 above what students can read on their own. Finally, the science points to the necessity of frequent, shared, and independent writing, not just to inform others, but as an essential learning tool to help students crack the code and to synthesize and communicate their understanding of topics and text. So that's the scoop on the science of reading. Be on the lookout for more science of reading videos that dig deeper into each of the 5.
There we go. I think you can see in 3 minutes we covered a lot of territory. One of the things that has really happened is that especially in K2, the way we teach reading is much more scientific and structured. And the great thing about that is it makes sure that all students develop the skills they need to be able to be readers. I lost my PowerPoint. Is that it?
If you just scroll further.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
You gotta get on it. Look on it. Oh, is it frozen? Oh, there we go.
There we go. So we've got a lot of variety of areas of science that impacted the science of reading. So cognitive psychology, communication science, developmental psychology, education, special education, implementation science, linguistics, neuroscience, and school psychology. So for somebody that's been teaching for 30 years, the way we're teaching, especially early literacy, has become much more detailed and technical. And we're gonna see the outcomes of that and more of our students being able to read earlier and not playing so much catch up down the road. Oh my goodness. This is not my computer. I apologize.
Just 2 fingers that way.
There we go. What's really important, there's a lot of talk of the reading wars and that some folks have tried to politicize what's happening. I would stay away from science of reading, considering it an ideology or philosophy, because it's coming from science and the research. It's not a fad, it's not a trend, it's not even really a new idea. It's not a political agenda, even though for us it was SB 127 that brought it to the state. It's really not a political agenda. We just want all kids to be literate and to be able to read. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. It's not a program of instruction. So sometimes folks will say, we're teaching the science of reading. We are not teaching the science of reading. We're using science of reading strategies to help kids access our curriculum and to teach the standards. It's not a single specific component of instruction such as phonics. It's much bigger than that. One of the things that we need to remember is that reading is not a natural process. And I want you to think in your memory. All of us have in our background a child, a grandchild, a neighbor, a sibling who really struggled to learn how to read. Reading is not a natural process. Speaking to a child typically ensures that they will learn to talk, but not necessarily to read. And while important alone, it will not yield fluent readers. Instead, reading really requires explicit, systemic, and cumulative instruction. And there's real strategies for doing that in a way that makes sure that we don't lose any students along the way. This instruction builds connections between certain areas of the brain, and these connections are really vital to reading. In fact, when you look at the brain science, is probably some of the most interesting part of this, where they've taken readers along the continuum and really studied their brains to see which areas of the brain are triggered and how, over time, for both reading and writing, they're building connections between the different lobes of the brain. So Drs. Ann Cunningham and David Rose note that beginning readers show more activity in the parietal temporal region, while more experienced readers become increasingly active in the occipital temporal region. And so they've even studied adults who can't read, and areas of the brain just don't light up because that information, those connections aren't there. So we're really using the best of science to help more of our students learn to read. So one of the basic concepts of the science of reading is the simple view of reading. And it really says that if you want to get to reading comprehension, you have to have 2 parts. The first is word recognition, and the second is language comprehension. But you'll notice in between those 2, it's not an addition sign, it's a multiplication sign. So over 150 scientific studies have empirically validated the simple view of reading. It shows us that reading comprehension is not the sum, but the products of 2 components, word recognition and language comprehension. If either one of those is weak, reading comprehension is diminished. I know that I came as a young teacher from the era of whole language, and really maybe in my early career had some resistance to phonics. What we've really found is it's not one or the other. Students really need both. The science shows that we need strategic word study and word recognition skills, but then we also need really enriching experiences with literature and nonfiction text in order for students to build all the background knowledge that they need to be able to apply those skills. Reading words in isolation doesn't help you comprehend, but having somebody read something to you that you can't read for yourself, in the end, you've got to have both pieces in order for our students to access what they need to be able to access and do well in our schools. Here's another concept that's really important to the science of reading is Scarborough's reading rope. And what this says is between that language comprehension domain and that word recognition, there's some really important skills that need to happen. So under language comprehension, it's really critical that we're building background knowledge that we're using academic vocabulary, building vocabulary for students, that we're teaching the structure of the English language, that we're helping develop their verbal reasoning skills, and that we are teaching literacy knowledge, which is things like print concepts and genres. And then on the word recognition side, it's phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition. You can see both of those blend together to develop skilled readers. It's not a one or the other from the very beginning in early literacy. And I see Nan in the back, even down to preschool. We want to catch them very early and to begin to develop these skills. You can tell I'm just a little bit passionate about them, just a little. This is really an important thing to share with you. Louisa Moats, who's a well-respected scientist in this field, says that teaching reading is rocket science. And what I would say is you cannot passively teach early literacy, K-5. You really can't do it at the junior high and high school level either. It really takes intentional practice and craft on the part of the teacher. And our investment in our teachers, especially with coaching and professional learning, is absolutely critical for them to be able to implement this science in a way that leads to more readers and stronger readers. So the way we break this down in Granite School District, this is actually color-coded for our new series, HMH. We're trying to make the science accessible to our teachers. So there are 5 pillars of literacy: phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary comprehension, and writing. And this is actually the color codes of how it's found in their HMH materials. So this system, the purchase that we made, I wasn't part of the adoption, but I'm really glad we purchased this particular product because it has been organized around the science of reading and makes it very easy for our teachers to find it. In fact, the biggest concern is it's almost too much. But you saw how broad the science is, so helping our teachers hone in on exactly what their students need, that's what we're working for professional learning and with coaching. 2 fingers, I will get it. So for me, we really simplify it, and we have skills that fall under teaching kids to read, so learning to read. And those we track by Acadience, ALO, and that breaks down whether kids have basic phonemic awareness skills, phonics skills, and fluency skills. You're used to looking at those scores over time that tell us how proficient our students are at reading. What we really need, if we're going to move RISE scores, which I know is a big priority for the board, is a lot of focus also on reading to learn, and that's vocabulary comprehension and writing. You can't divorce the two. Both are absolutely critical for our students to be able to thrive. All right, so you can see that the learning to read side is all that bottom word recognition part of the Scarborough's rope. So this is how the science is embedded here. And the reading to learn part is that upper part, that language comprehension. So we're using the best of science to make sure that we've got complete structures, complete literacy blocks. And in fact, you'll see this is the work of Becky Monson and collaborating with the state office, my predecessor. We've really worked this year on creating enough time. Enough time is defined by the research of how much time students need in each of these components across the grade levels. So there is a 120-minute literacy block is our target, and you can see it's organized around the simple view of reading and Scarborough's rope, and it's all laid out for teachers what should happen in each of those blocks. Now, those blocks don't necessarily happen in 120 minutes in one block. They can be divided across the day. But essentially, we're hoping and supporting our teachers in making sure that we don't leave anything out that they need to help kids to be able to read. We got it. I am really excited. I want to show you, we've been keeping what we're calling game film. We've been out reporting teachers in Granite and watching the progress and the great things they're doing. This is Mrs. Reba from Stansbury Elementary with her second graders. You'll watch, I think she's really close to 90% MLs in this particular class, but watch what they can do. It's pretty exciting.
We're going to learn about some new vowel schemes today. Okay? So, our first vowel scheme we're going to talk about is I-E. What are we talking about? I-E. I-E. Now, I-E makes the I sound. What sound? This I-E makes the I sound like the word. What is it?
All right, I am completely biased because Miss Reba was a student teacher for me at Granger Elementary. And it was a joy to go in. I actually got to visit her more recently where she was doing writing with the kids. What you have to remember is how many of those students are Spanish speakers. There is no long I in the Spanish language. So they really need, all kids need it, but especially our MLs need really strategic, specific, explicit instruction in how English works so that they can internalize those things so that they can apply it when they're reading. It is a lot of repetition, but this is about a 20-minute block for them that will later go on to writing and dictation. They'll go through a whole set of skills in that time, but you could see the kids are really on. One of the things that we found early on is our teachers really appreciate and value seeing their peers in Granite schools teaching. They feel like those classrooms look like their classrooms. It's great to celebrate things that are going on. You'll see people then reach out to folks at other schools can I come see your classroom? Will you talk to me about that? And so we're trying to build this whole network of teachers that are talking to one another and learning from one another. We believe the talent is here in Granite, and what we want to do is magnify that work. All right, now what am I doing? Well, there we go. All right. Clearly, I am not Apple proficient. Here we go. One of the things I want you to know, and this is really essential, and it's something that we have to talk about all the time. We are still teaching Utah language arts standards. They are what drive our instruction and our proficiency-based learning. But we want to make sure always that we're teaching those standards in ways that are evidence-based and with materials that are aligned to the science of reading, and that we're measuring progress over time to make sure that we're not losing any of our students in the process, that all kids are making good gains. In this particular video, we focused on those learning to read skills. We also have videos of the reading to learn. That deep practice, exposure to literature is so critical. Reading words in isolation or small passages does not make lifelong readers. Those are essential skills they need, but equally as important is what we're doing with high quality literature and helping kids access that and talk about it and write about it and celebrate it. So no, we have film there, and I would be happy to take anyone on a tour if you want to go see, but there are great things happening on both sides of our instruction. Here we go. So SB 127 is what brought the science of reading in a very strategic way from the state office, from the legislature to the state office to Utah. And they set a very ambitious goal that by the end of 2027, that 70% or more of Utah's third graders would be reading on grade level. That's a very, very lofty goal. This year's first graders, the class of 2036, is that group. So we're tracking them through to third grade. It's important to note that what does reading on grade level mean? Some of you may remember we used to get very excited when kids got to green or blue on dibbles. The target score for reading on grade level is actually in the blue zone. It's a 405 composite score for third grade. It's a very ambitious goal. What they found over time in research is that in order to feel really confident that kids are going to continue to have the literacy skills they need as the rigor of the curriculum increases, they need to be at a 405 by the end of third grade. And so over the course of time, we're switching our language to not just settling for kids hitting the green, but that we're really trying to push kids to that blue. What I love about this is that sometimes we haven't pushed our kids who already have good early literacy skills as far as they need to go. We have kind of said, oh, they're at green, they're good. But really now we're all focused on helping all kids maximize their reading skills as early as possible so that they'll have what they need throughout their education. There we go. So SB 127, that's where the need to progress monitor kids comes from. So we give benchmarks testing 3 times a year. And then our students that are struggling, we continue to progress monitor them to make sure that our interventions are having impact, that they're continuing to increase, and that we're not, if something's not working with 3 data points, then it's time to look at what else we need to do for that student, whether it's more intensity or a different version of the program. Like, we're constantly working to make sure that kids are not falling behind. So if we think about what we know about the brain, and how much easier it is when they're young to build those connections in the brain. We have this precious time before third grade to get a lot of these things in place. It gets much harder after that time. So that's the way we track that. You remember that a few years back that all of our teachers went through LETTERS training, all K through 3 teachers and special education teachers. LETTERS is merely a program that encapsulates the science of reading. So they've taken the body of work and given them a strategic pathway for learning that. Our K through 3 teachers and SPED teachers took 2 years to go through that. And so we're putting all these pieces together. We have the assessments to see what's happening. We have the teacher training, and we're continuing to teach. On my team, we have 5 LETTERS trainers in-house in Granite School District, and they are continuing to offer LETTERS trainings for teachers who may not have been around when the first round of LETTERS came. So we'll continue to offer that as well. The last piece for us, and maybe the most important piece, is we've kind of built this science of reading structure in Granite. The pieces haven't necessarily been in order, but this year we got the linchpin piece is to have materials that are actually aligned to the science of reading with HMH into reading. And I know that our RFP group, just as with the secondary, has spent a lot of time making sure we're getting the most rigorous, high quality instructional materials that teachers can use in the classroom to help support literacy. The intervention pieces, we've had SIPs in 95% for the last couple of years, and we're seeing great outcomes from those. But really, we don't want more students in intervention. We want our tier 1 instruction to be proficient so that we're getting 70 to 80% of kids on grade level, in their grade level, without having to go to intervention. Here we go. All right. So one of the other initiatives that we've had over the last 2 years is trying to target that group who has to be, where the target is 70% by the end of third grade. So we have introduced what we're calling milestones, some goals for, last year was just K and this year for K and 1. One of the things that we have to do is a mindset of what kids can actually do. I'll give you an example. Under Wonders, it took almost the entire year for our kindergartners to be introduced to the letters of the alphabet. It was like 1 letter a week. It took the whole year. We don't have that much time. We know that many kids come in with those skills, and we know others can learn them much more rapidly so that we can actually get into the way words work and blending words. And so we set some goals that we started tracking the number of students in our district who knew letter names and sounds by November 1 in kindergarten. And we have a target to have, we're tracking how many kids can read 10 whole words by the end of kindergarten. Because when they walk in the door for first grade, they already have to read words in order to get to green on Acadian. So we need to make sure that our teachers are moving to blending much earlier, and that we're helping students progress at a faster rate. And we've seen some phenomenal data of even our most impacted Title Is, where you're getting 70% of kindergartners who by mid-year knew their letters, names, and sounds. It's fabulous, the work that's happening. Many of you may have been out for literacy nights or the literacy kits that we've worked with the parent engagement team on. All those things are about galvanizing the entire community around helping our young readers develop the skills they need to be successful. And then this year we added milestones for first grade, target of 15 whole words read by November 1, and then correct words per minute. By mid-year, they are already being assessed on their fluency with reading connected text, and so we set some goals there. Next year, we'll be setting a goal for second grade. So just continuing to develop our skills and rigor. If you take a look at this data, I'm really super proud. So if you look at kindergarten, last year at BOY, kindergartners came in at 41% proficient, and at mid-year moved to 50%. This year, our kids came in lower. They came in at 34%, but look at that. At mid-year, we were already at 53% proficient. So look at that gain that they've made. Same thing historically with first grade, we've gone backwards at mid-year because it's the first time the fluency is assessed. So we went from, last year was 43 at beginning of the year and 40 at mid-year. This year, we went from 43 to 44. So for the first time, we moved in the opposite direction where more students were reaching those targets. You can see we've got some work to do second grade. I've already told you that's our big goal for next year is to carry that up. But already, even with HMH and the focus on really good comprehension, and more exposure, we're starting to see those numbers shift, and we're really excited to see what happens by the end of the year. So that's benchmark. We're seeing similar things with POP. So last year at mid-year, POP is the percent of kids that grew how we expected them to grow. Yeah, I'm gonna make sure I said that correctly. So in kindergarten last year at mid-year, we had 53% that hit their POP target. This year we had 59%. I mean, those are significant shifts. And first grade went from 47% last year to 53. I really feel like we're in a renaissance in Granite School District, finally having the training, the materials, having all these things aligned where we are going to continue to really change the trajectory of what happens. And it's going to be exciting to see for this generation of students what happens for them across the course of their career. All right.
Can I ask a question about that data before we move on?
Always. Yeah.
Just curious as to the reasoning for, so you can see the kindergarten end of year, 63% there on the previous slide, 65%, and then they roll over to first grade, and it's down to 43% for that same cohort of students.
Mm-hmm. It measures different skills, and the biggest one is that mid-year first grade is the first time they're reading a passage. So before that, it's prerequisite skills. So that's a big thing, being able to read words in isolation to be able to read connected text. So that's a huge, huge jump. The shift, as in the early grades, the shift for discrete skills is really specific. It's that whole progression of how kids learn from sounds to words to connected text. In the upper grades, it really is then about the increase in the rigor of the text, the sophistication of the words. But again, this is why first grade you often see that drop, and we're really happy this year that we have stemmed that tide. That means more of our kids were ready to read connected text. All right. So our academic priorities, oh my goodness. I'm just a little nervous. I am so sorry.
You're great.
So if we
Just
look,
means we need to have you come more often.
there you go. Okay. I will, no, I'm not volunteering. Y'all are lovely, but here we go. So we're looking over time at scores. Things have been pretty stagnant. They've been pretty stagnant. You know, you see a dip from the time of COVID, and then you see some slight increases. But what I really love and have appreciated sitting on the Elementary Guiding Coalition and sitting on SALT is just this real desire and the time and space we're in Granite School District, but we're really rolling up our sleeves and saying, we can do better. We really can do better. And I want to give you the confidence that on the literacy side of things, especially in elementary and then extending to secondary, is we also have the science behind it, the strategies behind it, and the tools behind it that we need to change this trajectory and really start moving. It's going to show up first in those learning to read skills under Acadians, but as those students build their skills, it's going to take off also on the higher order literacy skills, those comprehension skills, those writing skills will begin to show up as well. I was in a class today with HMH on writing, and we had one of the parts was kindergarten. They were asking teachers what they have enjoyed so far with HMH around writing, and one of the kindergartners had put on there that they have students that are writing 2 sentences already. There was a time in Granite School District where we really weren't writing in kindergarten, but we know that kids can do more, and to give them voice and the ability to express themselves and to learn to write with intention and purpose, all of these things really help improve their passion for education and get us going in the right direction. All right, that's what I have for you. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. I'm glad I don't have to move the slides anymore. So now I'm almost Mac proficient. So I'll be ready to take the assessment. Does anyone have any questions or anything I can answer for you?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Maybe it's quick. And maybe this is even a Todd question. The funding from USB, correct, for the letters training, does that have a sunset date? Are we taking that on? Are we continuing to pay for letters training, or are teachers paying for their own letters training? How is that?
Yeah. This year, we have an early literacy grant money, and we have paid for our teachers to take letters. I think it's really super important. Ben, that's actually done Superintendent Horsley has actually come by several times to just thank that group for their investment in their learning and their knowledge base for their classrooms, and it's been great to see. And we will continue to have cohorts as long as they need it. I saw some data today. The state knows they didn't capture everyone, and so they are strategizing around how to get more teachers. But for us, we have the ability to do it. Yeah. So we have 5 individuals here, and together the district literacy coaches and district literacy specialists deliver those classes to teachers.
I would just add, agreed. This is a huge investment and probably one of the most important things that we do. And I think our data is not reflective of the challenges that we're faced with. Because if you think and consider that over the course of the last decade, our multilanguage learner population has grown exponentially. The fact that we don't have people at home that can simply read with their child in English for 20 minutes, which is what we would expect from a typical middle-class population, and ask for their support in that way. Our schools are taking the brunt of having to teach these basic English literacy skills. And so these coaches and this program is pretty phenomenal and pretty important. And considering the data points, if we were some other normal district, not awesome, amazing, like Granite District, then I think we'd see different outcomes. But given what we are, I think our outcomes are pretty darn good, and I'm particularly proud of this. I've actually had the opportunity to go out and shadow a couple of our coaches, actually more than a few of them, and seen the work that they're doing. And they've let me come in and teach some of their Tier 2 interventions and do that. I would encourage you all to get with Amber and some of her amazing coaches and go out and have that experience with these kids and teach them some of these basic skills. It's a lot of fun, and you'll see where the need is and how important the work that they're doing is.
I couldn't agree more, and I think it's really exciting to be in classrooms right now, the vibrancy of, you saw all those second graders sitting in front of her, 100% engaged. I'm so proud to show what they know. That's not a single classroom. We're seeing that widely across the district. So it is a renaissance for early literacy in Granite, and it's been a privilege to be part of it.
Connie has something, and then Julie, do you have something too? Why don't you go after Connie?
I have been on the board a long time, and my goal when I started was that we become examples for the world. Why can't we do that? We have the best, and I appreciate greatly for the commitment that Granite has made. Also, I would love to be able to ask that parents somehow are taught so that they can work with their own child. It's not that they don't want to, it's how? What do I do? So I'm hoping that there's some little help for parents also.
Connie and I worked together. She was my board member for 8 years while I was at Granger, so I love her. So let me just say, I think what's really exciting is curriculum and instruction has been working side by side with family engagement. And we started with those kindergarten kits that are in both English and Spanish. Everything has been recorded for parents. We've seen an explosion of literacy events for parents in our elementary schools. It's amazing. Schools are getting really creative and doing them at drop-off and pick-up even, when you know you've got this captive audience of parents coming through the parking lot. And we're seeing a lot of traction from that. There is no doubt that you are spot on. It is going to take the work of all of us to continue to move this to make sure that all of our kids have access to high-quality instruction.
And I just want to do a shout out for family and community engagement.
Yes.
They've been great partners in in our goal to establish really discrete milestones at the K level and then up through the first grade level, and then to get it out into the hands of our parents through these kits. And so JD's done a lovely job of getting us funding to build those kits and then get them out there. But I also want to speak to what Superintendent Horsley was saying in terms of having to rely so heavily on us in the schools. We are now, with the help of our family engagement department, building QR codes that literally train Spanish-speaking parents and English-speaking parents in the best ways to do letters and sounds, to play the games that are actually supporting the science of reading. And we're even dipping down with NAN into preschool now and getting out into the community, into the daycares. So that's our next event. We have an event tomorrow night where we're going to start introducing some very, very foundational or primer skills at those kinds of events so that it's there before the kids even get to us.
Noelle's being modest. Noelle with the Family and Community Engagement Director and the Family and Community Engagement Department are going out to schools. If you look at their calendars, if anyone calls them, they're there. They'll be there on the family literacy night, and they'll take up most of the lift too. They'll copy materials, they have everything prepped. They'll come and train side by side with your teachers. They have the experts on this. So principals, I'm gonna give you a little shout out. You call these people because they're here and ready to help.
I want to add one more thing. We were out at Walker in this parent center that Tony Bino helped. And one of the things we heard out there is that our parents really do want to learn side by side with their students, which is really incredibly powerful. They want to help their students at home, and they've been excited to learn the same skills, so they're getting the knowledge of how English works as well compared to Spanish. And so it's been exciting to see just a move in some new directions.
Thank you. Julie, go ahead.
Yep, I totally agree, Julie. I also have really seen our principals step up to be the literacy leaders in their buildings this year, really connecting their CIP plans and their efforts, their strategic plans to focus on, we all know that kids have to be able to read if we're going to get them to graduation. We all know that intuitively, but we've seen every part of the system really step up and really embrace this. So it's exciting to be able to share with the board what's been happening around the district.
Can you give your best guess, I guess, as to how much of this science of learning methodology is reliant on ed tech for its delivery in our district, and especially with ML learners and
Right.
as we get to the higher grades?
Yeah, I think So a couple things. I think especially, can it be done without? Yes. But we also, that visual component and making sure that everybody can see what the teacher is doing and talking about really helps and assists all students, our special ed students, our MLs. All students need to see it for themselves. You could do it with a small poster. You could do it old school, but the technology enhances that part. I think where things shift is when you're working on comprehension, that is what we all remember, interacting with our teacher around text, talking about it, getting engaged in it, and then writing about it, sharing ideas with one another. So I think different parts are enhanced more from technology, but I think, technology is a help. I think Noelle wants to add to that.
Yeah, technology definitely enhances it, but it's the teacher, and it's the skill of the teacher that makes it. If our students were just to use the technology, they wouldn't. Data shows they're not learning anything. The teacher has to be highly skilled, highly trained, and so that ongoing professional learning, like Julie was referencing, is crucial to our teachers because these are highly complex skills to learn and to teach. And so what the technology really does is it creates kind of a standard for us so that we don't veer off, and it allows for kind of a place to reinforce for the teacher some of the different aspects and the different strategies. So it's an enhancement. It is not something that can take over the actual work of what a teacher needs to do. We need highly skilled teachers and highly trained teachers to be able to do this kind of work.
Well, and it's the teacher who's deciding what is on that presentation slide, right? And that is based on what they know about their students and what they know about the science and what they know about their standards. So you cannot take a high-quality teacher out of that equation. That's the most important element.
And then, I'm referring, I appreciate your responses, and I know you're talking about like this slide she had up as she's having the kids engage with her. I'm asking more specifically about how much time do they spend in front of their Chromebooks interacting with the curriculum? Like how much of that is going on? And I would imagine with our ML students it's more, but I just don't know what that
I actually think, I think it's less. I don't know if you all have seen, but with this purchase, we bought what's called a My Book. So rather than a hardcover book, every child has their own soft color book that has got in color and high quality graphics, the text, and then places to annotate, highlight, and write. So if anything, I think what we're seeing is much more student engagement with the actual texts, more discussion, more writing. That's the way this program has been designed. So it's not passive sit and get. It's very active and intentional in the way we're introducing students to text and then helping them work through it.
Thank you. So I think, it would be, I don't know why we would consider it progress to render our teachers obsolete. So that's definitely a big concern in my mind, and just want to make sure we're staying away from the screens as much as we can, right?
I think if anything, the pandemic taught us that too much screen time is too much screen time. And what we're really seeing now is quite a renaissance in terms of teachers trying to figure out ways to really pull off the screen time. We're really limiting that independent time to situations where we're working with one small group while kids are rotating through those. But we know based on the data that we've seen that that is not how our students are learning. So our goal is really that active 100% engagement all of the time and working on the strategies that get there. But that interaction between teacher and student and student and student is key. That's our focus and instruction right now.
Even the programs, so like iReady or Mira or Lexia, they all have guidelines of how much time students should spend on those programs, and it's actually really small. It's really targeted, specific, strategic instruction at their level. It has never been intended for hours of long practice. It's never intended to be a babysitter, and so that's why we use it typically in small group as a center where kids can get some differentiated practice, but I couldn't agree with you more.
I just want to say thank you for your presentation. Super helpful, and it was really interesting. Like, that science behind reading is fantastic. And I just want to give a shout out. I've had so many great principals in my precinct invite me to their literacy nights, and the engagement level is high, and it's so great. I have a couple schools that they turn in the Halloween theme, or they take the theme and they make it fun for those kids to take home some reading activities to do with their families. And I think that has helped our engagement in our community so much. And so I appreciate your support to help our principals be able to do things like that in our community. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Clark, did you have anything? Karen? Oh, okay. Karen, did you? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one real quick question.
Sure.
Because I go help with the EMA learners at the high school. Have they ever approached them with the science of reading, like using that in the secondary schools? Because I can't help but think that maybe some of this, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't help. Maybe, is there a different way that they've proven that it's better to do it the other way?
Yeah, so at the secondary level, we've also really started to double down in terms of reading interventions. So the secondary ELA specialists in the curriculum and instruction department actually teach a reading endorsement program. They partner with the U of U, and we started doing that we started doing that during the pandemic when we had the ESSER funding. And so we were able to do that startup, but we've for years seen the deficit that you're describing, where kids who didn't acquire the skills need to address the deficits. And so we have more and more teachers every year that are in the reading endorsement program, and we have more reading classes than we've ever had before. So it's actually becoming a part of the master calendaring discussion at the junior high level and the high school level of how we fit in the targeted reading intervention class, not just a reading class where anybody goes who needs extra help and you kind of make do, but a skilled teacher who's been trained in science of reading. So they actually go through the foundational letters components, and then what we add to that is adolescent motivation. So there's a lot about adolescent literacy that has very much to do with relevance and motivation and what feels like it works for kids who have faced a lot of heartache and not too much success over the years, and how to get them very, very motivated to continue to build those skills. So that's how we're addressing it at the secondary level.
Thank you. I just wondered if that translated anywhere in there. I appreciate that. Yeah. And I mean, looking at those, it's true. You look at that and say, well, why are we so low? And granted, but at the same time, knowing that we have how many ML learners that we have in our district, I think it is commendable that we are working on this and that we're using this science of reading and really hitting that hard. So thank you for all that you guys have done with our teachers and your team. So we appreciate that. Thank you.
And like Karen, I'm really mad that I'm losing Amber, but I will use her just as much over in the school leadership and improvement department.
But I love hearing this, because this is, I'm hoping this will translate now. She can have this direct impact to as she goes out to these schools. So that's right. Thank you.
That is the plan. We want to see great numbers. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the warm welcome.
Okay. We're going to switch direction and invite Nan Barnes up. There she is.
My presentation has nothing to do with Amber, but just so you know, everything you adopted last month with the preschool curriculum, part of our RFP process and our criteria was all around science and reading. So everything that we adopted is a perfect match, and we've been training our leadership team in letters, it's called EC letters, so early childhood letters this year. And so preschool will we're in an exact match. We've taken those November 1 kindergarten targets, and we've taken those down to the preschool level, so those are the targets we've been using this year. So Scarborough's rope has as much to do with preschool and early literacy on that end as it has to do with K, 2, 3. So that's my passion too. I love literacy too. So, and Amber's wonderful, and I too am sad because we've done a lot with Amber, but she'll be awesome in SLID. So thank you for your time tonight. I came tonight by invitation of Superintendent Horsley that asked me to come and just give you an update on preschool funding and the financial outlook for the 25-26 school year. So just briefly, oh, we're not on a scroll anymore, now we're on a click, all right. So, actually, I need to come back one slide. Whoa. Yeah, there we go, we don't have to scroll on this one. Perfect, there we go. So just as a quick overview, preschool in general, we have kind of two sets of students that we serve. We have our general education students and our special education students. So our general ed students are our Title I eligible children and then our tuition paying children. And then our special ed students are the ones that are in our inclusion classrooms. So that's the majority of our classrooms. Those classrooms have usually about 5 kids with disabilities in that classroom. And then we have our special classes that are our higher needs special ed kids that have, by their IEPs, the needs in that classroom. So those are kind of our two populations. Right now in preschool, as of today, we have 1,897 preschoolers enrolled. And of those kids, we have 215 additional kids on wait lists. So we have a high demand for preschool and lots of kids enrolled. So as the question about how do we do funding in preschool, so we use a braided funding model. You can see on that graphic, we have general ed monies and we have special ed monies. Our special ed monies come from IDEA federal funding, both on the preschool, there's a preschool line and there's a school age line, and then state special education monies. On the general ed side, we have tuitions, registration fees, donations, our Title I and TSSA money that we use. So we use a braided funding model to truly try to utilize as much as we can. Some of these streams have really strict guidelines as to ways we can use them, percentages that we can use things. So we use a braided funding model because we have limits on some of them to be able to really benefit and utilize the most we can and be as fiscally responsible as we can with the different funds that we have. So looking at next year, even with the braided funding model, we're still seeing some challenges that are coming up. So over the past couple of years, we've seen some consistent annual reductions in multiple of our funding streams. IDEA money has gone down federally. I mean, you guys know Title I money definitely hasn't increased and has decreased sometimes. Our tuition revenues are decreasing also. So with that, the other big piece, so there's a grant in the state that's called it's now called the High Quality School Readiness, HQSR preschool grant, that has not been adequately funded by the legislature. So we've had grant funding in the past. We didn't have it last year. We wrote for the grant last year, and we scored second highest in our application, but we weren't funded. Between the people that applied and scored high quality and the money that was available, there was a $12 million gap. So there's a huge need for preschool funding in the state, but there's definitely a shortfall. We've written for the grant again this year. It's turned in. It's in process of being looked at. This year is actually a multi-year grant. So if we're funded this year, we're actually funded for 3 years. We don't have to reapply again. That was a change they made this year. Superintendent Horsley has been very active in working with legislators and really trying to advocate and help them understand this need for preschool money. Right now, there's an RFA, a $5 million RFA that's been presented to the legislature to ask for additional funding for the HQSR grant. We have been told we won't know anything until mid-April to late April on the grant. So that's kind of where we're sitting there. So with that, and knowing...
Could I speak to that real quick? Just
Say again.
as a matter of update.
Yeah, go ahead.
With respect to that. So in addition to that, we've also looked at getting state board rule modified to allow for TSSA funds that might be allowed for this purchase, but there's also a bill that would eliminate TSSA altogether. And new funding. Yes, it would be held flat to that extent. So there are some challenges on that front, and we continue to look for some potential solutions. But the data is pretty clear. Our students who participate, especially our high poverty families, when they come and participate in our high quality preschool programming, those kids are much more ready for our kindergarten, and you're going to show us what that looks like.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, they definitely are. So as we're looking to this and knowing the value that this plays in our schools, knowing what we experienced last year with not being funded because of the grant shortfall, we're really trying to look forward and be proactive in any way that we can this year. So in looking at kind of our two sides of the stream of the streams that we have, obviously special ed money is fixed. There's nothing we can do to like go and get some more special ed money. Those are fixed streams. So where we have the opportunity to make an impact is on the general education side. So we've really been trying to explore some ideas of how could we add some revenue, how can we expand our current efforts, looking at it through a lens of how can we maintain as much enrollment as we can in that inclusion ratio and really maximize the impact that we have. So obviously, the best of the best would be the legislative funding comes through and there's enough for everybody that wants funding and everybody that scores high quality. Without that, again, we've been trying to really brainstorm and generate some ideas. So these next 5 that we've identified are solutions that we actually have some control over. So the first one is registration fees. We don't sit in the K-12 registration fee structure. And so we're allowed to charge registration fees in preschool. So we're looking to raise that registration fee by $5 this year for our tuition-based students. The next thing we're looking at is monthly tuition. So right now, in Title I schools, we do not charge any tuition. But because of the shortfalls, we're having to look next year at charging some tuition and having to have everyone contribute at least a little. We want to make you aware of that because it is different than something we've ever done in the past. We've also worked with Dr. Erin Wilson to make sure we've checked in at all things at state level to make sure of any Title I regulations, requirements, that we make sure we're following those. And in some of that research, we've actually found that other school districts charge tuition in their Title I schools. So we have never, ever, ever done that here, but we're looking at needing to do that next year to try to generate a little bit more revenue. It will be nominal. It won't be full tuition by any means. Again, trying to really make sure that we get our highest need kids into those seats so that we can do everything that Amber's been talking about and really be a value add on that end.
Can you just give us an idea of what monthly
we're
tuition
looking
is,
at
regular tuition? And
Yep. So right now, regular tuition is $200 a month for 4-year-olds and $150 for 3-year-olds. On the Title I end, we're looking at doing $40 for 4-year-olds and $20 for 2-year-olds. So keeping it as minimum as we can. We have some history with an early reading first grant we had started in 2005. I was an instructional coach at that point, but that grant didn't require us to charge parents anything, but we charged a nominal fee, and we saw better parent participation when they were paying just a little bit. So we have a little bit of history that we're coming from on that and thinking hopefully that would help with a little buy-in too. Permits, special permits. We have always allowed special permits at Title I schools, but we're looking again to limit that to only kids that attend in those Title I schools, knowing that if we have to close classrooms, we again want to do everything we can do to maximize that our highest need kids get into those seats. So we would stop doing those special permits at Title I schools unless there was a principal request. If there was a principal request for a special exception, we would do that, but then we would charge some tuition with that too, because those aren't kids that are living in the boundaries. So scholarships, in the past, we've been able to do full subsidies for some families. That's something we're looking at, not being able to do full subsidies again next year, or for next year. And again, requiring some sort of a tuition. We're looking more like a half tuition there, to be able to still provide some opportunity for families, but to generate some revenue also. Donations, we just met with Sean and JD last week. We're really trying to expand our work with the Education Foundation. We have some additional grants that we're working on, different proposals that we're putting out to companies. We've really been trying, I've got an incredible person that works in our department that she's really kind of scoured the websites and the foundations and fundings to try to see who might have an interest in early childhood and maybe who could we push forward some proposals to that might have some interest. So those are solutions that we've identified that we're starting to work on and planning, like I say, to move forward on. Kind of to summarize what we're seeing, you can see this chart kind of gives the good, the bad, and everything in between. So obviously the far left, if we receive the HQSR grant again, we could go on as is this year with no concerns. No classrooms would need to be closed. We wouldn't need any reduction in teaching force. We would still have the same amount of gen ed and sped students. The far right is the ugly. If we don't have the ability to bring in any revenue, we would be looking at closing in 10.5 preschool classrooms next year, reducing our classroom teaching force by 21, and we would have an additional 357 kids that wouldn't have preschool spots. Obviously, you can see that special ed line. It stays the same because by law we're required to serve our special ed students, so that's not changing. We will obviously still continue to serve those. Then those two in the middle, working to the left from no additional revenue, implementing initiatives. So those are the 5 that I just talked about. If we implement those 5 things like we're looking to do, you can see it makes it a little bit better. We don't have to close and lose quite as many. And then that second from the right next to the HQSR, that initiatives and district support, that would be as close to what we've been doing this year. So you all know there was $1 million set aside from the board. It was set aside, I think, actually 2 years ago, but then we didn't need to use it because we were so horribly staffed for about 2, almost 3 years that we saved a ton of money because we didn't have staff. So the leadership team and myself and my assistant director are out teaching a lot. So we saved some money there. So this year we have been spending down all of our reserves that we had built up, and then the $1 million is what we've been using. So that second column over would be kind of what it would look like next year. Our best projections, obviously not knowing COLAs or anything like that, that would kind of be our best projection with that next year. So, Superintendent, anything else you wanted me to add there? Just wanted a really good summary as I kept sharing these things with him. He's like, let's share it with everybody. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now. Questions? Things I can answer?
I have a question. Go ahead, Julie.
No, we're asking for, it's like 1.99 is what we're asking for with Granite. The gap between everyone in the state that applied, both private preschools and LEAs, the gap in funding was 12 million. So there was basically 12 for the whole state, not for us. No, our ask that we just put in for this grant is 1.99. Basically, I mean, best projections for right now, yes.
So you've hit on something that's a little bit touchy for me personally, so I apologize if I get a little snooty here. But the fact that this program funding was looped over to Department of Workforce Services and part of traditional daycare is appalling to me, because our preschool programming is not daycare. And so having to go and ask on bended knee for additional funding so we can qualify for a grant that we should just automatically get because of the program and its successes is just, it doesn't take into consideration the tremendous amount of data that shows the effectiveness of high quality preschool programming, and especially with impoverished or limited English proficiency populations. You just saw this amazing program and some of the successes we're seeing on our science of reading. The challenges just become exacerbated when you have students coming into kindergarten who have no ability not because they're not willing or not because they're not smart. Their families don't speak English. And so it's really hard for a family who doesn't speak any English to teach their kids basic sounds and identification of letters in the English language. And that's what we're a traditional English-speaking middle-class family comes into a kindergarten classroom speaking over 2,500 words. And most of our impoverished families are 600. And if you're limited English proficiency in a home, you're probably coming in with very little identification of those letters. So the fact that our best and most needy populations and the way this grant is being funded is through a daycare programming grant through Department of Workforce Services. Clearly, I don't know how to fix that because our legislators should be listening, but they're not.
Hey, Ben, so is this new? Oh, sorry, Julie. I was just wondering, so is this grant was redone done this coming? Is this,
It
was
is that what we're?
reconstituted several years ago.
Okay.
It's retooled kind of year after year after year.
Okay.
And it started with USBE having more control. And it is a grant that serves both private childcares and LEAs. So it kind of services everybody, but now it's just recently with some, again, changes last year, it's now housed within the Department of Workforce Services, USBE, and there's a school readiness team is what they're calling them now. It has representation from both, but it is funded. I mean, and 6 million of there's 12 million allotted to the grant every year. 6 million of that is coming from CCDF funds, so that is childcare, like federal childcare money. So we have 6 million that's coming for LEAs.
Okay.
We have a lot of
So it's sort of
preschoolers out
morphed
there.
into that. It's like,
Yeah.
it's gradually
There's
changed.
been a million
Okay.
iterations over the years,
Okay.
yeah.
But some of the requirements of the grant are really intended to address private daycare-based requirements, and we're not a daycare, but we're being categorized as one. So I'm a little bit embarrassed by it. That's not your fault. That's,
Trying to stay off my soapbox, I'm trying to, yeah. There
you're
are
doing
some
a good
things
job.
that- yeah.
I'll get on mine.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Julie. Clark?
You mentioned that you try to provide priority to certain families that are at most in need, perhaps. How do you assess that
Yeah,
as part of your
great
regular
question, Clark.
approach?
That has actually been something that's been part of the grant for years. And so when preschool families register, they actually fill out a kind of a risk factor form. Those risk factors come from the ACEs study. And so they do that. And so when we have had grant funding, we're actually required to look at those factors and to prioritize kids based on those factors. So we have between that and financial, the grant also sets aside English language learners, so our MLs, and any kids in foster care, that type of thing, to have priority. So we have never gone away from that because, this is the soapbox I'll stay off, it was actually Granite District that helped form this entire grant. So the high quality markers that are part of legislation that you have to write on the application to, these were actually things that were formed from that early reading first grant from 2005 to about 2012. We had no early learning standards in the state. We had nothing like saying what high quality preschool was. It was actually our program in Granite District that provided all the foundational data that got all of that legislation written. So it's a little frustrating we're not in it.
Julie, did you have something else?
whatever the board feels inclined to help support. I mean, this is budget questions, so that's why we're bringing this here and wanted to have a conversation about what the outlook looks like on this particular program. Our top priority is to get the grant funded and look for other potential ways to provide that funding, potentially through TSSA, but with that funding not increasing, the chances of that being helpful is that window is closed to some degree. We need some growth in the funding in that program to be able to subsidize this piece. So I'm not hopeful on that front.
That would definitely fall under the initiatives, Julie. Either one of those scenarios is where that would fall. And again, it's just so variable that we don't know when and how much and all that kind of thing. But yeah, it would fall under the initiative. So either one of those. Absolutely. Correct. Mm-hmm.
I just, remind me, if you're like on an IEP, you're a 504, and you have a preschool that needs it, do we charge the same tuition? Is that tuition free because of the IEP?
Yep, it's
Okay.
tuition free, so none of our special education students pay tuition. Yeah, that's all provided, and that's hence the reason that line
So
is
the
zero.
zeros, but I knew we had to serve them, but I couldn't remember the financial
No.
aspect of that.
No,
So thanks
no
for
tuition,
clarifying that.
yep, no tuition charged to those kids. And obviously, those special education funds that are on the fixed funds, those are the funds that are funding those kids, yeah.
So my question is the scholarships part that was up, I think, the slide before this. When it says no full subsidies, do we stand to lose, like, do you have any idea at all? Would we lose families if they did not have full scholarship? Are there families that can't afford a $20 or a $40?
I think the answer would be, yes, possibly. We've tried to be really careful on that because we don't want to lose families, because the families most likely we would lose would be our highest need families. So, I don't think we can guarantee that, but I definitely think, we're going to try to do everything we can not to lose them. But I do think there could be a possibility that we could lose some, yes.
Is there anybody that we can call for the grant? Just kidding.
It goes through, don't call anybody on education because it doesn't go through education because it sits in DWS. It goes through the economic, yes. And then it's been brought through that committee now. So now it's on an appropriations list. So, really, I think it would be those that sit on the appropriations committee at this point.
What was the committee prior to appropriations? Thank you.
So it's just general appropriations now?
Yeah. It's not education money. It's just general appropriations. Yeah. That's the hard part.
Okay. Julie, did you have something else?
I'll just add in, Julie, it's one of our goals in preschool to absolutely give that family the most successful start. And we know that oftentimes we have families that
our parents are coming back to the school and they may not have had a great experience themselves. So that truly is one of our key things that we focus on with families, is giving them a positive experience, getting them connected to the elementary school. I mean, we're in enough elementary schools that there's only a handful that we're not in. And so you're absolutely right. That's one of our main goals of the family, is to get them connected so that they are in the school, they know the people in the school, and then we can just keep them heading right into kindergarten. Yeah, and we have preschools currently, Julie, at all of our Title I schools. We have a preschool in every Title I school. Yeah, so they're coming to their home school.
So when you say WPU, do you mean at the district level or at the state level? So at the district level, the WPU does come in as unrestricted funds and could be used, and essentially is what we are using right now to backfill the grant that we don't have. At the state level, the state funds on K-12, not pre-K. But again, it doesn't restrict the use for pre-K, it's just not in the funding formula.
But it's still, we would have to decide where we would take that from, because we're not rolling in it, right?
Yeah, we'd have to reallocate.
Do you actually have data on how many kids that have attended our preschool matriculate all the way to, say, junior high or high school?
I'm sure, I'll let you answer that question.
We've actually had some external longitudinal data studies done by a professor from BYU, sociology professor, that actually have shown like effect size on, especially with our more at-risk populations, our Hispanic population, on attendance and on ACT scores too. So there is, yeah.
The data that Julie's referencing is what I showed some legislators this last fall to get the RFA going, because what it showed was actual students over here at one of our neighborhood schools, and identification. It was 3 class lists for 3 kindergarten classes, and it was first year. This was like the second week or third week of school, and so it was that testing that gets done to see where kids are at, and sights and sounds, and of both lowercase and uppercase letters, and then an identification. And you could see the kids that were involved in our preschool program, where you're like, oh, that one was, this one was, and it was literally about 80% of the kids who had even remote identification of letters and sounds had been in our program. And so the impact. I mean, if you're a kindergarten teacher and you're looking at all that data, only a handful of those kids have participated. And so you're starting from scratch, literally showing the letter A, sounding it out. And these other kids had already were way ahead by virtue of being in that program.
Exactly, let alone the school skills that go. Like, they know what a classroom is, they know what a teacher is, they know there's some rules they need to follow, and the structure doesn't throw them off, you know. We deal with that on the preschool end. We take the crying as they start in preschool, but that, again, that's one of our biggest goals, is like, get them into this school so they know what this is, and then give them all these pre-literacy and pre-math skills so that when they hit kinder, that gap that Julie's talking about is either closed or much closer to being closed. And their little brains are learning so much in that 3 to 4 age range for our MLs. Like, the strategies that we use for all preschoolers support our ML learners. I mean, you know, so they come in not knowing a word of English, and they go out being able to speak and express themselves with some skills already that they're headed with. So that's another big thing, is like, if we can get them in the door and have them for that time, it makes a huge difference in their confidence level and their ability to just function within a classroom.
I would just say, I believe our system exists to support families and parents with quality outcomes. And one of the primary jobs that we have, just based on the last presentation, is to help kids learn how to read. And this is such an essential function to support those families who do not have the ability to teach. They don't know English, and that's not because they're bad people. Yeah. They just don't know English. And so it's really hard to, again, teach your kid to learn in English by reading with them 20 minutes a day, which is our expectation of families, if they don't have that ability to do so.
And I think that other piece that Amber and Noelle both alluded to is that those pre-K kits now, looking to get funding for those so that we can start to support families in even a more strategic way of getting them to understand, how is it that I do this with my child at home in the preschool world, and how do I start that? So I think that's another really, I'm excited as I'll get it out about that piece. So.
And I would add too that one of the benefits, just seeing, because I have some friends who teach the early, the K, K3, having them in preschool helps us identify if there are some issues that we need to work with them on, because it's super hard to do that. I mean, kindergarten, that's, but first grade, second grade, third grade, and you're trying to qualify them for the services that they need. And the sooner you can get them there, the better.
It really is. It's a huge child find piece for kids that land in preschool, that we kind of go, whoa, we need something more than just a preschool classroom here. And it is. It's a huge piece of child find that we use to be able to get those kids the services they need even sooner in that early intervention piece.
Yeah, and it gets them that much further.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Julia, you look like you have more.
Yeah. I think it's a high likelihood, especially for our higher risk kids, yeah. Our families that are middle to upper income, probably not so much, but for sure our high risk kids. No, we have a wait list right now of 215. And that has decreased some over the year because families just, like, they drop. They don't think they're going to get in. So yeah, I mean, we currently, as of today, we have a wait list of 215 students. It's both. Both, yep. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Kim.
I think I'd seen data around, so talking about any learning advantage that students have if they've been to preschool versus if they haven't, that difference or that advantage disappears by, is it around 5th or 6th grade?
There's different studies out there. There was a longitudinal Head Start study that showed that some of the effect size went away. I'm trying to think if there's other longitudinal preschool studies. There was one out of Tennessee that it was showing that to start with, but then it was kind of brought back. It was a few years ago. I would have to refresh myself on it. It was kind of brought back as to that wasn't exactly what the data was saying. So yes, but there have been some longitudinal studies out there that have shown that the effect size can wear off as it gets like into the later grades, yes. But again, I think it's how you look at the data too, and especially when we're talking about this gap of like actual skills. Do we know exactly where they were, and are they headed to kinder with an actual skill set that we can quantify that then feeds into all of this stuff we're talking about with learning to read and that type of thing, to feed into really the third grade reading, being able to read on level at third grade.
Thank you. I'll be maybe just the 10th man here. I think little kids in preschool age, it's most important for them to be spending time with family. I'm not personally in favor of bringing kids into public education younger and younger and more kids. And so I personally I'm not trying to take away from a value proposition necessarily. I just don't see it as essential to our mission and goal. I think like perhaps we need more research on this subject, but I think since research does show that over time that gap disappears anyway, I don't know that there's a whole lot of, need to push, right, more and more kids into that preschool setting personally. I think there are also other options out there. Like my kids never came to a Granite preschool, but I just send them to a neighborhood friend who helped to do that. I don't think we're the only end-all be-all option. So when we're talking about funding, I'm giving this background just because if we're talking about funding, we have a lot of competing priorities this year, as we all know. And again, I'm just being the 10th man. I have maybe a different opinion than the rest of you on this topic. So I would prioritize other things probably higher than moving money toward preschool. So just to be frank on that point.
And I appreciate your point of view, and you're absolutely right. There are other options out there. I had a kid who was a special ed student for a while, and then once he progressed past that, we just finished out the year as a regular student and paid the tuition. But I can also tell you, we sent him to a different preschool the following year, and the difference between them was huge. And I appreciate that there's a lot of options out there, but I think when we look at the fact that 70% of our moms, if they could stay home and mom was reading to them, I think that's great. But I think more and more we're seeing these kids not at home with mom reading to them. We're seeing them at home with mom working and them on a screen. And I would rather have them in a classroom with quality instruction than sitting with a screen in front of them, because that's not quality instruction either. And that's creating not just a gap in their reading, but also in a lot of other things that I mean, you've talked about how screens are not great for kids. And we're seeing that so much with the kids as they come in. So I guess just offering my perspective as well, that I see that those kids come in not just with that deficit in reading, but in a lot of other skills. And I'd rather see them here than sitting at home with a screen in front of them with an iPad watching shows, watching YouTube or something like that. So anyway, but I can appreciate what you're saying as well. Julie, go ahead.
And I think that's key, Julie, is to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples too on that data, what they were doing in the programs type of a thing too.
I just want to say thank you, Preschool, for the families that want it and need it is very important to give these students all around, just, the etiquette in preschool, and they have, all of it is very important. And thank you for the high quality that you're determined to have here in Granite. I appreciate
love it.
that. Yeah, that's
We love those
great.
3s and 4s.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break while, I'm assuming it's Dawn that's setting up, right? Are you going up? Are you up? Or is it Todd? Todd and Dawn? Okay.
So you need a really long break. Luke's gonna help us. I'll be your damn wife if you want, Todd. Kind of. Just make sure you spin the wheel.
Sorry, Senate Bill 37 is before the House tomorrow, and they're looking for talking points to do a call to action.
That's important. If you need to step out, go for it. All
We'll
right.
take care of it in good time.
We're going to go ahead and continue on. This is our last item. And we had asked to just have you guys review with us what is happening with our current real estate and what we're doing, the release process.
Perfect. Hopefully the slide presentation we've put together will get you through an answer to that question, because it ends up being complicated. I feel like Doug sometimes. It depends. It's a legal answer. But we'll go through the slides. Please ask questions as we go, because it is a fun topic, but challenging at the same time. These are the areas that we'd like to cover tonight in the time allotted. Talk about the Real Estate Committee's role, how we start to look at retention or use of properties, some of the challenges we face when we close schools, what obligations do we have and responsibilities do we have for the property, as well as the legal and financial environment that we operate in, and then talk a little bit at the end about long-term view. What is the perspective that the committee uses as we look at properties that come to our attention? So the first is, it's great to have guidelines, and for the most part, the district has history to rely upon and not necessarily written guidelines. So it's probably a great opportunity for us to put those in writing, not by policy per se, but something that we can lean on so that when questions come up, we can give a pretty uniform standard answer. When this happens, these are the things you could expect as possible outcomes. Or if this happens, this is how we react and we'll respond to those situations. So we want to make sure that we have that opportunity as we move forward to develop those guidelines. Right now, we're using our best practices of the past as we look at properties. Some definitions as we go along. There are some technical words and there are some less technical words. Surplus property is actually a statutory concept in statute. If the board determines that it no longer needs a piece of property, it declares it surplus. And that then triggers a section of code that we'll talk to a little bit later as to how that property then leaves the possession of the school board and moves into some other possession. Closed schools, we have facilities, and in some cases, if we decide to demolish the building, we have a property or a vacant lot, sometimes described. What is that? And then that's the last one, the vacant site. So this does not have a school facility or structure on it. And the district does have in its inventory properties that have no structures on them, but they were acquired in anticipation of future needs, whether it was enrollment growth or facility needs the district needs for its operations. So there are that category of properties as well. These are your illustrious committee members. You have myself and Dawn, Chief of Staff, General Counsel, then we have our risk manager, our architect, engineer, director, and planning and boundings director. So we have quite a broad spectrum of views and understandings and technical expertise that we bring to the committee as we look at all of the opportunities that come to us. When we look at properties, we have some basic buckets or different categories in which we look. First is if we have a property, we have to make a determination, should we retain it? Is there some internal use that we could use that property for? So for example, we had the foundation that needed better space, and we made a school available to them. So that was an internal use. It didn't go out to bid, didn't go out to lease or anything like that. We kept it in-house and took our own internal programs. We could also sell a property, again, through that surplus designation. The property could be sold. We'd go through a regular sales process to dispose of the property. And we also have the opportunity to lease a property. So this is building or land that we could make available on a short-term basis or a long-term basis for someone to lease the revenues and thereby generate revenue for the district. We have a number of criteria that we go through to determine which of those 3 buckets we might put a property into. We do need to take a look at the age and condition of the site itself. We have some schools that are old enough and have different hazardous materials in them that we have to make some real determinations as to whether it's appropriate to lease that property, use it for future internal use, or estimate what the cost would be to mitigate that if we needed to demolish the building itself and retain the property. So those are items that we go through. We also look at the financial viability of the space. Some properties have really good market values for different purposes in the valley, and others don't. And so we would take that into consideration as well. We look at the legal environment that we're in. Do we have responsibilities for tenants and improvements and other contracts if we get into any of the leasing scenarios? We also take a look into the future to say, this property isn't needed today, but in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, will that neighborhood regenerate? And we will have students that we need to accommodate. And if we divest ourselves of that property, we've just made our challenge 20, 30, 40 years out all the more difficult, because there won't be a piece of property to build the school on or to have the students come back and be housed. So we do take that into consideration, as well as what are the revenues or the finances of that property, and can we find the best use for that property given the constraints that we see within the committee. Am I covering, am I good? So I'm going to turn the time over here for the next several slides and let Dawn talk about some of the challenges we have as we look at closing schools.
Yeah, the most important thing that we want to make sure that we provide for at a closed school is that we're not creating a neighborhood eyesore, an attractive nuisance, et cetera. So we staff a custodian. One custodian roves between every 3 of our buildings right now at the elementary site. At, projecting forward at a closed Cypress, that school will need its own associate custodian roving, and so they'll probably be under the purview of the custodian at Brockbank. We're continually doing inspections for mold, for leaks, damages, et cetera. That's something that we have to keep on top of because it will ruin our facilities, and that's never good. It's always more expensive to have a facility in disrepair. We're always checking for, again, pest management, those infestations and health hazards. Nip them in the bud, right? Just got to get on it. It's the ugly side of our life, but it's something that we do regularly. We're always trying to make sure that we're a visible presence, and that if we see vandalism, we promptly remove it. And then we patrol, granted, PD patrols. We're always trying to make sure that people understand, even though the building's closed, it's not vacated by us. We're there and we're omnipresent. So those are the important things that we have to do when the school is closed. And we traditionally plan to have 2 or 3 years worth of coverage budgeted out and staffing arranged to do this after a closed school. Sometimes it just takes time to get it into our system, to determine what the real estate disposition is going to be, to budget for disposal, demolition, whatever it is. I just didn't want to leave buildings closed and struggle. We learned a lot of lessons off of the old Granite High School. So those were lessons learned that as I came on board, I saw that building had been neglected and it caused a lot of problems. And so we determined a system to not struggle with that. Yes, ma'am.
I just caught something you said. I have a problem with the real estate committee and how slow as molasses we move. I think I've been very open about that, so I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. You just said that when a school is closed, we plan 2 to 3 years of personnel. So as a board member, I hear that and I'm like, So if I vote to close another school, we're not doing anything to reach out to communities for 3 years?
No, I think that's misinterpreted. Even when you engage with communities, some of them are taking a while to get their decisions made and operationalize
Are
what they
they
want to do.
taking a long time, or are we? Because I don't think it's just them. I think it's us.
No, it'll be both sides. We're in several lease conversations that have been in place for as long as I've been here. And it's working with the legal counsels and putting that language together. There are others that are definitely us. There's interest in putting some of our property to use as teacher housing. And we don't have any constructs. We have no policy. We have no standards by which to venture into that opportunity. And so those pieces need to be put in place, and they have not happened quickly. And so it depends on what scenario we're working our way through.
I think what I need to understand as a board member is, as we continue on the steady march of looking at school consolidations, that these kinds of decisions, the real estate committee and how long they're taking to make these decisions, will factor into how I communicate to the communities about us really being in good faith, saying we're taking care of their school. So we can take care of their school as far as you're saying with having a custodian there or whatever, but that's not what they want. They want to know, what is their building going to be used for? And so for me to close a school and then wait for 2 to 3 years to be able to answer that part of the question after my board action vote has already been done, I'm trying to reconcile that in my mind, because how do I vote in good faith to close one more school here if I can't really promise that community in good faith that we're moving quickly to ensure that some good replacement, something or another, is going into that community? Because that's something we hear a lot as board members, is what happens to the property? What happens to the community? What happens to our community center? Is it going to be a park? Is it somebody else are you going to sell the property? All these questions. 3 years is kind of a long time to have to wait to be able, as a board member, to be able to give them a legitimate, factual answer. So these are the struggles I'm trying to reconcile, is how do I in faith go and vote another school closed if I know it's going to be such a lengthy, whoops, that's my microphone, sorry y'all. If it's such a lengthy process before we can give a true answer to that.
And I just want to, I appreciate that, Karen, because I'm hearing a lot of it right now about Cypress High, and you're saying you learned a lot from Granite High, having a building that was empty for so long. Yep. And I think my community looks at that also and going, please don't let that be Cypress. And I know you have thought about that it would, we don't want an empty building there for years and years and years. So, but maintaining it 3+ years is also probably not in the best interest of the community either. So how would we have conversations with our community about that?
I think that's very interesting, because it's the challenge, again, when we talk about what we learned from Granite High. South Salt Lake, and Superintendent, you went through this as well, so check my memory. South Salt Lake went through periods of interest where we want to be there, we want to use it as a community center. They entered into a lease agreement and said, well, let us just lease it until I can go to my community for a general obligation bond to turn it into the community center we want. And so we did. And their GO bond failed. They came back to us and said, wait, we're going to try it again. Can we continue to be there? And at that point in time, the lease had maintenance obligation on their side. And one day, heats off, pipes froze, boards warped, we had a problem. And so we had a very damaged building. That's what I'm trying to prevent, is turning what used to be a usable facility into something that now when you rehabilitate it, the costs are substantially higher for any next user. And so they went through and had a second GO bond election fail. And these were very close. The community tried very hard, and it was literally a handful of votes separated success from failure. And so again, it's not necessarily how quickly we're acting and reacting, but even if it becomes available, what's the local jurisdiction's ability to fund for acquisition, for repurpose, for whatever they want. I just experienced at Granite the long haul. And so I just said, well, we should not do that. And we saw the degradation of the building, the degradation of the community, folks trying to come in and steal copper and successfully steal copper throughout the building. We just can't do that again. And so again, I'm just saying, I'm prepared to do it from the get-go in conversations with Todd on a budget for 3 years, because I don't know what I don't know. And that's why I mentioned that is Granite was really hard. And I don't want to have one of our facilities be the attractive nuisance ever again. So I say I plan that because I don't know what our reciprocating partners' capabilities are.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
That makes more sense, and that's a better explanation of why we would do something like that. But it's such a big facility with, I think 72 door entrances and stuff.
Yep,
So I'm concerned about that, and my community's concerned about that.
We'll keep the security systems active, all of what we can do. I'm just saying, based upon lessons learned from Granite High, the minimum we should budget for and think about is this. Whether we get something off the books in 2 months, 4 months, whatever, I just don't want to be left holding the bag that I didn't think about how to protect the asset in that area of town.
And I think high schools are its own animal, for lack of a better term. So when I'm speaking more, just to be clear, I'm speaking, and I appreciate Chris bringing up Cypress. Obviously, that's your area. You're probably hearing a ton of questions on that. But I'm talking more these elementary closures. If that's my specific concern of reconciling this timing issue of promising the world to the community when we go and close their school, but then it's years and years down the road before we actually do anything. For example, Westbrook, Taylorsville told us 5 years ago they were interested in Westbrook. Well, we've also known the exact year that Westlake was going to move out of Westbrook, and yet here it sits. So it's just a few things like that raises my eyebrows and makes me think, are we moving as fast as we can? And I appreciate all the legal, like everything you said, Todd, totally agree. But it's, like I said, I'm struggling with the concept of close now, figure out later. That's what I'm struggling with.
Yeah, and I think we feel that same struggle because we are somewhat flat-footed because we don't know what the board's decision will be till it's made, and then we start reacting, which is probably not helpful either.
Yeah.
And do we have guidance that the board would give us that say, hey, we're engaging the community, the community partners who most likely could use the space in a conversation.
Yeah, you're
at the right
highlighting my
moment.
exact problem with reconciling, because you're not acting till we vote, but when we vote, it's a delay of, I don't know. I'm struggling with that overall.
No, thank you. I think we're all struggling with that same timeline. But back at the ranch.
Do you want to do this one?
Yeah. So these, I gotta remember what I was going to say here. So as we look at the potential uses of facilities, these are the areas that we start looking at. Is there a short-term occupancy? So is there a community partner out there that's interested and has come forward? Or do we need to be on the front foot and go chase them down and say, hey, this opportunity is coming? Do we need to turn this into something that can be used on a short-term basis? How ready is the building for that? We're finding that some of our buildings have hazardous material conditions. And the question then becomes, well, whose responsibility will it be under a lease or some other short-term arrangement to clean that up? Do we need to get it into a certain state and then it's now ready for use, or can we pass that along, or how do we manage the readiness for repurposing?
And if I could, the comments here are typically surrounded through asbestos abatement. So this is asbestos that's trapped in place that if it's not moving and we're not touching the walls or disturbing anything, it's perfectly fine. But those that want to reuse the facility want to remodel in some way, shape, or form. And so again, they're perfectly safe for occupancy unless you start to remodel and disturb material. And that's one of the challenges that our partners always have is they come on board, hey, we're interested, oh, let's get somebody to conceptualize our reuse, and then we have to react to that conceptualized reuse and understand what materials may or may not be disturbed. And so that's even when you're proactively engaged with a user, they put their thinking cap on, and then we have to react to, okay, then that means X, Y, and Z. And so that I just wanted to say, they're ready for repurposing. The building's fine the day we close it, but when they want to demolish something or modify, that's where we encounter some challenges.
And then we had mentioned that there are some legal requirements. If we're going to surplus, we go through a process there, and there are timelines established in statute as to how that happens. We have to let other jurisdictions in that area know that we are intending to surplus the property. Then they have up to 45 days to respond as to whether or not they have an interest in acquiring that property or not. And then if they say no, it can then go out onto the open market for sale. I think you've already talked about the timelines and compliance of repurposing. And then again, that public or private sale, we just go through the statutory process to accomplish that. So, go ahead.
Yeah, please. I just wanted to highlight what we believe. So as we're moving forward on a couple of these projects now, just the asbestos abatement and demolition cost, just throw it out there for when we're looking to roll this into capital and not adversely impact other school needs. An elementary school is going to take $750,000, $850,000 to abate and remove. And my best high-level guess right now at a Cypress High School type facility is over $2 million. And so, you know, when we talk about expediency, I'm not talking small money. When I get nervous about how I make sure I'm rolling out things to our existing facilities, taking a portion of that free money, and remember, Todd, in our I think January, you talked about some budgetary things, said, hey, you really have about $9 million a year worth of capital rolling out now that's not pre-encumbered. So to me, 2 million of 9, I'm planning it out, and I'm making sure that I can accommodate those things when I think about some of those budgetary. So in that budgetary impact, I'm using a little bit of long-term thinking here to make sure that we're not adversely impacting an existing school too much when we take down a closed school. Did we just go backwards?
Nope.
No, there we go. Oh, I see where we're at. So Todd talked about temporary uses and some community expectations. So we do look at what some of those short-term leasing revenues are. Granite High used to be used as a film set for countless films filmed in Utah. It had a historic je ne sais quoi about it that these site directors wanted, and so we saw a lot of that. We've even used some of the buildings that we have for storage. So when we were constructing Cypress and Skyline, we used them to store materials that we would acquire through the contractor 3+ years in advance because it was a lot cheaper to do it now than wait for inflation. And so it saved us a lot of money by storing light fixtures, flooring, ceiling tiles, ceramic tiles. So there's some internal reuse that makes sense. And then there's a concept of using it for a lifeboat on a rebuild or a remodel. Ochre Hills was used as South Kearns Elementary during its rebuild. Really important. And so we're looking at how that fits into our capital remodel and rebuild with some of our other facilities as well. It's so much easier to take students off campus on some of our schools than it is to keep them on campus and rebuild. Sometimes our sites are plenty large that we can operate and construct safely. There are other times where it probably is not in our best interest, and if there's a lifeboat school in the vicinity, we can grab that population and bus it, for a year or whatever. Canyons does this regularly with one of their middle schools. I think it's Crescent Middle has been used for, the better part of a decade in all of their remodels. They would take an elementary school and move it there. They've moved, I think, Union Junior there temporarily. They've used the lifeboat model successfully, and a lot of districts do. So that's another consideration that as we look at the long-term construction cycle, sometimes we may say, oh, that's going to be a great lifeboat for project X, if it's in the reasonably near future. Go ahead, Doug.
So these are some of the long-term considerations that we look into as a committee. So we have a operating timeline of a long period of time. When we build schools, they're for 40, 50 plus years of duration. And so we're looking that far into the future to make sure that we have our student populations covered and taken care of. We have our population projections. This is an interesting area because we have a hard enough time figuring out who's coming next year, let alone in 30, 40, or 50 years. There is data that comes out of the Ken C. Gardner Institute. They do their long-term population projections, and they look out into 2060. And their latest analysis that was updated about 2 years ago shows the dip that we're experiencing right now. So through the 20s into 2030, there's a decline in enrollment, and that's just not Granite. That's a statewide experience. But when we get to the tail end of 2030, it's going to come back, and not only come back, it'll surpass where we were just a couple of years ago. So it's a dip down and then a huge climb up. And so those are things that we want to take into account as well. Is yes, today we don't have the students, but not far in the future, as far as long-term planning, we could need those facilities back and online again for the students that will come back into the population. So we take that into account, because it would be easy just to say, oh, we closed the school, we're just going to sell it and move on. But if in 40 years we come back and say, oh, all those students have come back, where are we going to build the school? There isn't new land. Land doesn't get produced. It's there right now. We also have vacant land that is in our inventory, and we often have interest in those properties as well. And so we want to make sure we have our long-term planning in place for that, as well as will we get to the point at some time where we need to look at future expansion. It's not today, but as we look into that projections and say, well, if it's going to be higher than it was previously, are we in a situation where we need to be thinking about land banking for those futures as well? I think we've talked about the legal environment. So this is...
Yeah, let's go back one. There's a little nuance that in state law, if the district is acting to construct an educational institution, we don't have a lot of, we're our own jurisdiction and can take care of our own planning, building inspections, et cetera. When that use transitions out of an educational use to anything else, we actually have to comply with local jurisdiction zoning, building codes, et cetera. So just understand, if there's a use other than a school, there's some operational challenges of who regulates. And then just thinking as we go to sell these properties, Granite was a prime example. The community sets their future land use, not the district. We're kind of like a farmer selling a field, but it doesn't feel like that. Every member of the community says, no, we want you to sell it only for X or Y or Z. And so that's just, you know, the experience of the past. We don't control schools when they transition into different non-educational uses. So there's some regulatory and permitting processes that come with all of this.
Is it possible, I would assume this is a no, but I'm just asking. Mm-hmm. Is it possible to, if we did sell a parcel of land, to say it can only be used for this, this, and this if we sell it to you?
Oh, yeah, you can do deed restrictions, certainly.
Yeah, okay.
It affects the value of the property depending on what you're restricting the use to.
Okay. I just wondered.
So those are considerations.
You can do that.
You can. One of the things we've noticed is that over the past probably decade, a lot of communities used to keep the underlying zoning of the property. So if it happened to be a school that was bought in the middle of a subdivision and it had a quarter-acre lot designation, most of the communities seem to have kept that. They've now developed these public use zones and then rezoned it. And there's a diminution of value associated with that because the uses are so small. So we'd almost always see someone, whoever the buyer is, offer contingent upon receiving a zone that they
can then develop.
Yeah.
Just going back to granite.
Yep. Yes, you can do all of those things should you desire. Yeah.
So this is the decision-making process that we're in right now. So we conduct an analysis of the property. We evaluate the financial, strategic, and legal criteria and purposes of the property. We do present a recommendation. So you've had opportunities where we've talked about sales and purchases of property. So we make those recommendations to leadership. And then from there, it comes to the full board for action. So that's the process that we're in right now today. And this is a great time to review the process, and we're hearing it's not fast enough. So those are things that we probably should look into. Not probably, we will look into to see if we can make that more streamlined and more efficient for our communities to understand the future use, or at least the district's intended ideas around closed school properties. With that, I'll open up to any further questions.
Could I just point out, I'm appreciative of the real estate committee report that Todd forwarded out to this group. You'll see that monthly after those meetings. Just hearing some of the questions, concerns we got from the board, I appreciate them being responsive on that, and hopefully that will help. I did indicate that some of those communications are sensitive and involve some transactions, so please don't put that on Instagram. I know none of you would ever do that, but just putting it out there. So with respect to that, I appreciate the update, and I think one thing we really want to emphasize here is that we did learn a lot from our process involving the sale of Granite High's property, and we definitely don't want to go down that road again. So although sometimes it can be a little bit frustrating, we certainly want to make sure that we make good choices moving forward.
And if I could, we had a simultaneous transaction with Canyon Rim Elementary as a charter school that leased it for at least a handful of years and then acquired it. So we learned a lot from them as what you want to do as a landlord and who you want to sell it to your competition or not. And so I think those are some challenges that we always face as well.
Kim has a question, and then I think Julie has something.
So you mentioned.
Let's let Kim go first, sorry.
Sorry, Julie. So you mentioned some reasons why we may not want to sell property. Can you talk a little bit more about the leasing option and what some of the challenges there might be, pros and cons? If you already covered that, I'm sorry if I missed it.
No, you're good. I'll take a stab at it, and I heard Doug making comment already in the sideline. So one of the prospects that we look at is that 100-year timeline. So if we're not in a position to sell, like we believe that property will have a use in that time frame, we'll consider a long-term lease. So we have a ground lease in which someone can develop on top of the property, and then when we then need to recall the property, we can and reuse it for a school purpose. So that's one avenue of lease is this ground or a long-term lease. Some of the challenges are if someone's going to develop on it, they want it forever. They don't want it just for 30 years or 40 years. They want to be able to use it in perpetuity. So those are some of the challenges that we'll come into is, well, how long will this term be? Often we will look at those leases and also say we'd like a reversion clause. In other words, if we need it even sooner than the 30 years that we're willing to commit to, but we might need it in 15 or 20, what are the conditions around a reversion? So if you've improved the property, do we have to buy it back at you? Do we buy it back from you at book value or current market values or what have you? So those then get caught up in legal discussions as to, okay, yes, we'll do a long-term lease, and we have all these other considerations that need to be put in place. You can have short-term leases, which is, maybe someone wants to use it for a community center, or they want to use it for a charter school or something else. Then we get into questions of, okay, you're not just looking for the land, you want the building. So we're looking at a building lease. And now we have to talk about, okay, what's the condition of the building, and what condition will they maintain the building in? Will you be providing custodial and maintenance services, or will the district still be responsible for those? And if so, what will those terms look like in a contract? And those are the conversations that happen on those short term is, well, who's responsible to keep the building in good shape? And are you willing to pay for it? Some of the challenges that we run into with some of our municipalities is they see that this is a public asset already. The public has either paid for it with a bond, or they've paid for it through some other taxation process. So it should be available to any public purpose. Just because you stopped using it for a school doesn't mean the community can't have it for a park or some other purpose. And they'll ask for that at no cost. They'll just say, just let us use it. The challenge we run into as well, we actually bonded or we taxed for the purpose of a school. So those assets actually belong to a school purpose within the community arena. And if you want to use it for something other than a school, the community should be on the hook then to pay for whatever that new purpose is. So those are some of the challenges we'll run into is, hey, it's already a public asset. Let us use it. Thank you very much. They've covered kind of high level, but does that help a little bit?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Go ahead, Julie.
No, I do, and I'm happy that your schools over there have been taken care of, and that's good. Twin Peaks was like a no-brainer. I don't think there's any of us on the board that would ever take back, moving the foundation over there. That has been such a huge blessing to them, but also a huge blessing to us as a district and to every single teacher and every single student in the classroom we have. So that makes me happy. I do think that, all I'm saying is I think that I don't want to rush a decision, so I agree with you on that, Julie, but I do think that there can be a little bit more engine behind Little Push I've got Sandburg in my area, it's been closed for 4 years. And it's there. So there's just a few things out there, you know, Westbrook is not my area, but I've kept my eye close on that because when I was in board leadership, Taylorsville had numerous conversations with us about Westbrook every time we'd visit for our yearly check-in. So I'm happy you've experienced that, and I'm not saying I want to rush through and get the wrong decision. I just think that there are maybe some practices that we can put in place that just move it along a little bit.
I have a comment. So I wrote down a question. I'm like, do we have a larger number of empty buildings than historically in the past right now? Like currently, is this unusual for us that we have this many school? And I think that's where maybe part of this conversation, it's frustrating for us, is this hasn't happened before where we've had a large amount of empty schools. And so maybe that's where a lot of this is coming from with our communities also.
Yeah, I think the pace of closures has been a little more rapid than we've seen historically. And then again, Doug says by a long way. And then, of course, some of these odd externalities of using a couple of them for storage for the 2 high school builds. You know, these were hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars of savings to use Sandburg and others to store materials. And so it was an economic decision. Yes, it's a delay of what's happening, but you know, it saved a lot of money. Just taking that storage off of what a contractor was going to charge us to rent a warehouse, our ability to just keep ordering materials. So I get that there's some frustration, and rightfully so. I mean, there are a lot of details that go into why some schools had sat and not. I would say that the other challenge is that in years of closure, you had pretty good sizable swaths of vacant land that you could go reacquire for the next growth cycle. I'm not seeing that. This is an intensification of urbanization in our community that we've not gone through before. And I think that's also part of the scary part of we don't know what we don't know on student yield into the future. Salt Lake is getting very, very intensely developed.
And it has brought different interests into a closed school property versus, are we going to make a community center out of it? Will someone come forward and operate that, please? Versus, there is no available land. You just closed a school. You're not going to use it for that purpose. We would like to develop it now. So it's changed who's knocking on the door.
And that will only increase as the housing crisis continues to promulgate. And we know that the legislature's not been shy about exerting their thoughts and opinions on how we do things in public education. So
I think the big scary fear is that if we don't strategically hold on to pieces of property, we'll be forced to do a land acquisition, which is a shopping center.
Yeah.
And that could be a derelict shopping center or not, and it will be tens of millions of dollars for that acquisition demolition on top of a construction cycle of a school. So those are, I mean, that's when Todd talked about what's that strategic outlook. you're certainly not going to go into a neighborhood and buy 40 homes to get a school site.
Yeah, and I appreciate this, these slides, because I think it helps our public understand some of the challenges that we face when we do close schools. It's not just that easy to turn it around into something else or to something viable, which we have done with some of our schools, but I think it's good for them to know that saved us money with storage facilities. Like that cost, there is some benefit to that cost, even though that school is now going to be empty again. So, just I think if we can just keep our public in the know of what our plans are that we can share, I think is helpful. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Julie.
Well, I am. I feel like that if we have the land and we can build a larger school and have the land that is already available, even as the growth, if it increases at any time, then we can build another school down the road. If we, like you, I would worry about, I don't want a high rise in my neighborhood, and that's what it would be most likely in today's market.
I think the one thing that we're not getting more of is land. So, it's just we've got the land that we have, and so for me to support selling, one of our properties, I would have to have a really good case for it. Very, very outlined, because I think right now you can't grow more land, and we've got to hold on to the land we have. That being said, I'm not against looking at lease options and repurposing the land through leases, because that still allows us to own the land if needed in the future. Keep our options open, I think, is what Connie's saying, to have that land to potentially rebuild if needs be. You talked earlier, the demographics swinging back up. We're kind of in this little valley. I also know it never regenerates. Neighborhoods don't regenerate over 60% of their original population. That's kind of a demographic rule, by and large. Is that right? Projections?
That's the part that I alluded to, that we don't know what we don't know with this
Yeah.
higher intensity of urbanization.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. Back in the day, you'd build a new subdivision and it would come at 110% of what you think that population would be. And then the families move in and out and it's coming back at 60-ish, 65%.
Exactly.
I don't know what it means to have all of this infill coming in yet. And other, so back in my younger days as a consultant, we were a consulting firm for school districts in Southern California, and they faced this, that their urbanization was coming, and they had asset management challenges like we do, and they were waiting to understand, as intense development came in, how many kiddos did it bring? And I can't point to a rule of thumb in all of the communities in LA County, Ventura County, Orange County, et cetera, Riverside, where we work, that could lead me to say, oh, I understand exactly what's going to happen in that city, because each city was different, where, boy, we would see some crazy population swings in one community and the other just kind of held steady. So it's the I don't know what I don't know
Yeah, and I think that's
unfair.
exactly what both Connie and Julie are getting at, though, is if we don't know what's coming, we gotta be protective of the asset we have, right? And so, like I said earlier, I would have to have a really good case study for me to support a sale of any property.
I know this would have to be very, oh, sorry, Julie. Can I, let me, in my area, is that what you're asking? No, I think mostly because Westlake has been in there until this year. I mean, they're still, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if the building is entirely recovered from Westlake occupying it.
It's getting there. It's getting there.
You know, they had to remove the other, so I think that's the only property that they see in front of them as far as like presence of mind. So so the Westbrook campus is the only one that I'm thinking that they would even, that's at least from my.
Let me take a shot on that one, Julie. Could I take a shot on that? The one thing we did with the sale of the property of Granite High was about $10 or $11 million. And we put turf fields in all of our high schools. And then now we're replacing all those turf fields, right? So this one-time infusion of a small amount of money, comparatively speaking, to the cost of a new building. Think about, and I'm looking at Don, he's gonna nod his head, $200 million at least for a new high school, probably $180 to $100 million for a junior high. What did we end up on, Westlake?
65.
65, okay, not as bad.
But that was then.
Yeah,
Then
what does that look like now? Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking, and probably close to 40 for a new elementary school. Yet most of these properties are still, especially a small elementary site, 5 to 7 acres is not going to fetch but a few $1 million. And so it is scratching the surface. We'd have to sell a lot of real estate to even build one school. And the value of that property long-term has so much more value to us in a long-term cost-benefit perspective. Even if we do a long-term lease or some of these other, just making sure we have access to some of these pieces and parcels long-term there's some wisdom in that.
And just a consideration as you debate this, do we sell, do we keep, do we lease, long-term, short-term? The district isn't built around the idea of long-term leasing or short-term leasing. We don't have a landlord expert on staff. So as we venture into that arena, we'll need to pull some expertise in-house. How do you manage a lease? If you're in those responsibilities in the leases? We've been doing the best we can to get out of responsibilities because we don't have a lease person on staff, so we try to push it off onto our lessee, but it doesn't always work. And so there's just a dimension as we move forward. If leasing is the direction, we will need to manage ourselves in a way to do that efficiently and effectively.
I can tell you.
We can attempt to, they don't always accept as we go through negotiations, so it's a challenge.
And here's an example that I like to illustrate. If we prefer that the lessee takes on the maintenance of the building. Why? Because if they take on the maintenance of the building, the operational maintenance staff that's at the district gets to pay more attention to our open schools. And I think that there's an intrinsic value in paying attention to our schools that have students than servicing a lessee. But that's sometimes we get some inexperienced buyers that don't have capability, they don't know how to go out and find someone that can provide those maintenance services. And so that's also part of the learning curve as these lessees approach us oh, well, there's a servicer out there that could do this tenant management for you. You should have a conversation with them. And they, oh, okay, go have the conversation, learn and understand, build their capacity, and then return to us in the conversation. If you want us to continue the maintenance, we can. We just thought that was a disservice to our students.
Well, I think the big part, and I'll summarize what I think Todd and Don just said, that I think is really important here is that treating our especially our municipal partners fairly and the same and consistently, trying to swing a good deal for friends and family on these long-term leases, but at the same time making sure that our costs are in fact covered. And to some degree, those partners don't have the resources to do that, which is why they're trying to access this property at a significant discount. So even when we are providing as much as we can to benefit both parties, as it were, sometimes the costs are still denigrating to that partner.
I mean, I can speak to from the point of view of, I lived vicariously through my family with the whole Granite High School thing. And I mean, we can suggest to sell it, but that is a huge part of community and so important, so central to that neighborhood and who they are. And the thought of selling, I mean, Connie was here when they went through that. I don't think Karen was here when they sold Granite, but just, you know, that's why I asked, you know, because I know they wanted to put a Walmart on that corner, and the community was just, no, you can't have a Walmart on a road that is, you know, 2 lanes. It just, you know, it is such a hard sell, I guess, if you want to say, for a community, and it's much better, I think, not just for the community, but for us as well, that in our relation with the community, to say we will do everything that we possibly can to maintain this and keep this as a green space for your community. I think that's what the community at Westbrook, you know, this is a valuable green space for our community. Can we please keep this open for our kids to come play and for our dogs to come and run around and you know, things like that. I think that's
as long as they're picking up after themselves.
Yes, that's what I said to them.
Well, school's not in session.
But I think that's also, it's not just that we can't gain property, but it's a value for our communities, and it's something that they want us to continue to maintain as we are looking at that. So I hear you saying this with Cypress, that your community is worried about what's going to happen with that. I understand, because we went through that as well.
So to that end, we do have a mailer going out, an ad with an update on the Cypress High construction project, an announcement of Tim as the new principal at Brockbank STEM, and a reminder of what happens with the property once the school's no longer there, and that the district intends to maintain the property currently. But to this end, I think we can't, had I known what I know now, and we talk about a long time, Granite High closed in the spring of 2009. That property was not, the final disposition on that property took almost 5 years. And so it was.
I was on the board when that actually went through.
Yeah, and if I knew then what I know now, we never should have gone down that road. I don't think it was worth the $11 million. I don't think it endeared us to that particular community. There was a feeling of cutting bait and run, and then allowing for development to happen in treasured and open space in a place that didn't have very much open space at all. And so we're kind of in and I apologize, this is a family meeting, but damned if you do and damned if you don't on a lot of those types of decisions. And frankly, we should err on the side of caution.
Thanks, Ben.
I'm just throwing this out there, you know, spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. I don't even know if we would entertain it, but we've talked about how property is very rare, and we do have our GTI classes. Would we ever consider using some of that property as, I mean, rezoning it, some of this, and having them build the houses on some of that property, or is that?
We've actually had some of those very discussions.
Have you? Okay.
And again, the two challenges to overcome are proximity to the GTI. It makes transportation so easy when we're buying lots for them to build here. They're currently on some West Valley stuff because we couldn't find anything around the GTI, so maybe they'll get over that. And then the second is, what do the community zone the property? So we might have to go to bat in a community that zoned it open space, and again, in the right opportunity, we should do it. It may not endear us to certain communities when we go in and build homes on what used to be playground or, but it absolutely makes sense, and we talk about it quite often with James and others involved with CTE. It's very common, and it's front of our mind. Again, that's a repurpose that we think, what's good for our kiddos? We kept some of the granite high school lots and built on those as long as we could, and it's out there, yeah.
And so it'll come up more pointedly probably in a year or two, because we have enough inventory in stock right now to support the GTI program for the next 4 years-ish. And so it's going to come up.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. All right.
We missed some basketball games tonight, so check in with your local scores. We had a bunch of girls' first-round basketball games tonight. I think Taylorsville is beating Hunter right now. Olympus is winning. Those are the only two I've heard reports back on.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.